a sort of deep association with the Indian startup ecosystem. I run a program called Young Turks. It is perhaps the world's longest running show on startups and entrepreneurship. It just turned 22. And we've seen India's startup ecosystem evolve, change, and I think the breadth and the depth that we have today is exciting, and it leaves me with a lot of hope, optimism and confidence for the future. As part of Young Turks, we go out to the Valley every year, and this has sort of become this annual trek, and it was great to have these three gentlemen speak to us in June this year as part of our conversations, and I'm glad that we're able to take that forward here in India and talk about the Silicon Valley and India deep tech opportunity. So Arun, Nick and Sri, thanks very much for joining us here this evening. And Nick, I'm gonna start by talking to you because you exuded confidence and optimism about the partnership, about the collaboration between what's happening in the US, in the startup ecosystem, as well as what's happening in India, especially with the deep tech opportunity that we've been speaking about. But let's talk about investments. You've got assets under management of $1 billion plus at this point in time. You were talking about upping your India funding considerably. You were also looking at fundraising. What is this opportunity going to mean specifically as far as the kind of money that you're putting to work in India in future?
Yes, so we've made over the past few years, we made about 15 investments in India so far. And I want to give a little background first, and I promise I'll answer your question. You know, I remember when we started a company, we decided that deep tech in India was something we wanted to do. So in our very first fund, we started and we invested, the first investment we did in India was a semiconductor company. And that was because of the confidence that we had in the talent in India in the deep tech space. In fact, I remember talking to people back then, and they would tell us that India is not going to have a deep tech industry. It's all going to be services based. And we disagreed with that. I think when we talk about the investing, however, in deep tech, I think the challenge we have in India is not one of talent. The talent is there. In some of the areas, semiconductors and hardware, there's also some experience. But the experience oftentimes you find is relatively limited to on the engineering side, the engineering talent. In terms of understanding of markets and understanding of competitive landscape, so you can properly define products. Because one of the most, if you take a technology company in Silicon Valley, one of the most important roles that often people don't even know about is product definition. These are the people who understand the competitive landscape, understand the market opportunity, and are able to define a product that is going to win in the marketplace. And that doesn't just mean having a knowledge of the technology and a knowledge of the application, but a knowledge of the competitive landscape. So when Sriram and others have mentioned that you can't build a technology business just within the borders of your country, that is true. You have to understand all of the technology landscape, because technology is a global market. And so one of the areas where I think that linkage between India and the US, Silicon Valley and India can work, and where the VCs come in, is helping to bring some of those types of knowledge to the Indian opportunities, because the talent is here. Also helping to develop management. I think I don't know if Ankit is still here from Idea Forge, but I think if you look at some of these investments, whether it was Idea Forge or Aura Semiconductor, which were our two first exits in India, I think the role that the people who came out of the Valley played in helping them to understand what it takes to build a technology business, I think was essential in helping them to be successful. Because I've said publicly many times that companies don't fail because they run out of money. Yeah. Companies fail because of the reason why they run out of money. You have to take one step backward. Just like, you know, everybody dies from heart failure, but that doesn't mean the failing of the heart was the cause of the death. And so that's another area that I think the Silicon Valley connection can bring, which is helping these young startups to understand and avoid some of the pitfalls, the ability to anticipate and avoid problems versus the ability to get out of problems because you're really smart and you could work your way out of it. So I think a lot of the value that the Silicon Valley connection brings has to do with experience.
What's changed from a regulation point of view? How facilitative is the regulatory framework now to encourage this deep tech opportunity?
Well, I think the premise of your question is that the changes that are happening are reactionary, which I don't think is the case. Because I think in deep tech, if this is not new. In fact, as you were talking about, Nick having experience in looking at deep tech stuff long time ago, I used to work for Wipro. And, Dr. Mitta here, who is here, he was the CTO at Wipro. And I was this young college kid that came out of Indian Institute of Science. I walked into his office and demanded a job. And he, out of pure grace, accepted to take me in. And, I think I still owe him something for that. But the reality is, at that time, I used to work in his group, working on X.25, FTP over TCP/IP. I mean, these are just jargons. If they are jargons now, you can imagine how it was then. Yeah. But the point I'm trying to make is that even in those days, there was a very keen desire and almost, manic curiosity of young people, me included, to want to know and do the cutting edge stuff. We didn't think that it was called deep tech. We didn't think it was called cutting edge. We just thought it was cool. And we thought that nobody else was doing it. And in fact, Wipro had two different companies. One was called Wipro Systems, which is what has eventually become what Wipro is today. Yes. And Wipro Technology, WITL, it was called, Wipro Technology Limited. And that's where all the cool stuff happened. And I was in R&D, and I didn't know anything. But the point that I'm making is that the deep tech evolution that has happened, somehow people tend to conclude that this is something new that is happening. Yeah. It is not. At those days, people are programming on 68,020 machines, Motorola machines. And I know I'm dating myself now, but the reality is that was the cutting edge then. Yeah. So there is an inherent possibility and curiosity that exists in India. And the reason why that is germane to the question that you're asking about regulation is that these sorts of questions have been asked by lots of other countries. Everybody knows what the regulatory policy is. And as I think it was mentioned by Ami in the prior panel, as it relates to what Israel does. So you have to make, it's not just about AI or semiconductors that you have to worry about. You have to worry about a host of things. Capital flows. Yeah. How friction-free are you going to make capital flows? How are you going to make taxation conducive for, promoting certain industries? Why not consider, maybe it's a wild idea, why not consider certain key segments which you exempt from taxes for promotion of those? This may be, a controversial topic, but it's precisely for the reason why the government has to start asking questions as to how is it that we can actually accelerate. Because I do believe, as what Kevon was saying in the prior panel, you can't shoot at the duck. You have to shoot ahead of the duck. Because the things are changing so fast. There's no way India is going to be able to catch up to the leading edge fabrication of semiconductors in the next 10 years. Let's just accept it. Let's not try to convince ourselves that we should try and get the leading edge node of 2-nanometer chipsets being manufactured in India. That should not even be on a goal. That should not be on a...
So what should the goal be?
The goal should be focus on areas where we can actually leap ahead. So why not leap ahead in fabless design? We have a plethora of talent. We have young people that can actually learn much faster in areas if given an opportunity. So if we did an assessment, an audit of VLSI design courses that are done in Indian education system, and you will find there's probably 100 universities, maybe a little bit more, and you would certainly wonder whether the quality of the education of the VLSI design is up to par to create the next top engineer that is capable of designing a 2-nanometer chip. If that is not there, why waste the time talking about it?
So listening to what you're saying, would it be fair then to say that there needs to be better alignment between our competitive strength and where our competitive advantage can lie and the goals that we've set for ourselves? And is there a misalignment today?
Well, I don't want to, these are all, profound questions, so I don't want to be critical.
No, it's a fairly simple one.
Well, it's a simple one, but it's a profound answer you have to give. I can't give a flippant answer. And the reason is it's the right goal to focus on this sector. The fact that the Indian government is focusing on advanced manufacturing is laudable. Now, within that, you have to double-click on it and say, what are the areas where you can really get an
that's my
advantage?
question. So that's my
So the question there is, let's look at fabless design of all kinds of, of chips in telecommunications, in mixed signal, in RF, all sorts of areas. Let's focus on that. In manufacturing, you can focus on N-2, N-3 products. You take an average Apple phone, Apple 15, it doesn't have a 3 nanometer chip and every one of those components. There are a whole bunch of components that are 22 nanometers. There may be a whole bunch of passives. So why not focus on those and build a capacity
Fair
to
enough.
make those happen? Artificial intelligence. Everybody is, freaked out about artificial intelligence. You hear crickets about that from India, because nobody's talking about what is the artificial intelligence policy that has to be put in place for large language models in India, as it's specific to India. Nobody's talking about that. So there are areas where India can really leapfrog the dialogue and the narrative on what is needed in innovation, which I think is an opportunity that could be missed.
As you look at the opportunity that lies ahead, and perhaps some of the things that we need to be mindful of from the ecosystem's perspective, both at the government level, the founder level, as well as the investor level, what is it that you would like to put down?
So very briefly on the tax, there is a case that can be made for very directed tax incentives. For example, the R&D tax credit, which many countries have used, which are well qualified to make sure that there is increased real investment in R&D. So there are ways to do this fairly surgically to help. Coming back to broader situations, I would call out a very positive feature that we can see around the country today in terms of the support that entrepreneurs are getting from education institutions, the IIT Bombay, IIT Madras. Today we had a panel where we had folks on the panel who were supported by the IITs. That, I think, is one of the elements that's really changing the scene for entrepreneurship in India. So students of engineering schools, many of them are aspiring to be entrepreneurs. We had someone on a panel today say that at IIM Bangalore, the top jobs that people are looking for are not in companies. They want to go and start ventures. So those are changes that I see in the system that are very, very helpful.
Nick, on the investment issue, and I think this is something that's been called out as a concern of the startup community, that, if you talk about the kind of investment that the US draws in for the deep tech sector, 35 billion and in excess of that, or even the EU, which is, again, double-digit numbers, India's still under 5 billion at this point in time. So especially at the seed front, what do you believe we need to do to ensure that we draw in the kind of capital that's required to really realize the potential we're talking about?
Well, I think that there are different aspects of the problem. So when you compare the U.S., you certainly have a lot more deep tech investors who are looking at the U.S. market than are looking at India today, because there's still a concern about the geographical risk associated with India. People still don't understand it well, and they're not like us who have had prior experience in India will come in and get involved early. A lot of people will wait until they see some successes. So I think people like Celesta and others who are starting to pave the way, you'll start seeing a lot more people. In fact, we've already seen it. When we first started investing in deep tech, our first investment, we were the only investors. There was nobody else. And you're now starting to see more. And some of them are Indian investors, Indian VCs that are now starting to invest as well. And you're now starting to see US investors coming in. But in the deep tech space, there are not a lot of people who are really committed to deep tech. They will jump in when it looks good, and as soon as you have a little problem, they jump back out and they go on to easier pastures. So I think it will take some time, but I think the big driver will be success. As you see more and more success happening, more and more dollars will come in. I wouldn't worry too much about where we are today, because we're just getting started. So I would say 5 billion in deep tech today for where we are is probably not a bad thing. The question is, are we going to have much more than that in the future? I think there's another aspect, however, and Sriram touched on it. We can't just look at the curriculum is one thing, but in the deep tech space, you have to be able to leapfrog. And leapfrogging is not going to come from the curriculum that is taught in schools. It's going to come from developing of IP that give you a competitive advantage at the device side or at the manufacturing side. Today we focus on the device side because it's fabulous. And all of the innovation comes from the device, which means research at the university level and investing in research to develop core IP that you can use to leapfrog the competition is going to be a place where you're going to have to get some significant investment, and that's going to have to be led by the government.
You know, on that point, especially as far as R&D spends are concerned, and we've had this discussion every time the finance minister gets ready to present the budget, industry puts this down as a big wish list that, you know, enhance the tax ops associated with R&D investment. And what we've actually seen is the opposite. We've seen the tax ops being cut because the government's point of view is that you're not spending enough private capital on research and development, so why should we provide you more SOPs? How do we get out of this conundrum?
Well, I think you have to take a systems view of the whole thing. So one is these targeted approaches. The other is overall funding for promoting entrepreneurship. So you asked the question about seed funds. Well, seed funds have a big role to play, but they can be successful only if there are follow-on funds. They need to be the early stage funds like us, and then we will be more successful if there are growth funds beyond that. So you have to have this whole ecosystem. And that ecosystem, the government can actually help. In fact, today, Amitabh Kant, at the session before, earlier today, he talked about the need for a substantial fund of funds for deep tech. And he said, if you're looking at deep tech transformation in India, you need to fuel it with a very substantial dollar of funding, which can then backstop venture capital funds, which could be at different levels.
Sure. Well, you know, we'll have to wait to see whether the government moves down that road. They have, of course, got a fund of funds in place, so we'll have to see whether there is a further allocation provided within that or a separate fund altogether. But Sri, let's address the point that you were trying to make in terms of competitive strength and competitive advantage, especially as we anticipate future opportunities. And everyone at this point in time is talking about AI. And to your point about how should India look at the AI opportunity, what should the narrative be? Let me throw that question back to you.
We missed the browser revolution. We missed the whole internet revolution. We were building a lot of applications and services very successfully, but we missed the core technology development. Now you're given another opportunity where there's a new technology, and this is our moment for one more bubble. The bubble has come. Because there are some bubble-like tendencies in AI as well. So you have to pick the right areas within AI. And to your question, I think building, you know, the local languages specific language model, the regional languages specific language models doesn't exist. So today, if you wanted to get a ChatGPT-like experience in Telugu or in Kannada or whatever, it doesn't exist. And OpenAI is not focusing on it. And there are private companies and some non-profits that are trying to do that. You know, in fact, there's a non-profit called Karya, you probably know, which is doing that, right? Is there a commercial opportunity to actually take a leadership position in defining how local language specific LLMs can be developed? Because that presents an opportunity not just for India, it presents an opportunity for everything that is non-English. And that's AI. India has the capability to do it. We can take a leadership position in that we have such a wealth of experience in diverse language, you know, nuances here and dialects that can be easily exported to Africa and Southeast Asia and all of those areas. So that's just one example. So within AI, there are pockets of innovation that India can leapfrog. And I think that's an opportunity for us to think about.
That's the opportunity, and that's the bus that we don't want to miss, and that's the bus that we do want to ride. But Nick, speaking of disruptions and speaking of anticipating future opportunities, I mean, the set-top box has been disrupted by fiber and OTT, so that piece is out of the way at this point in time. What are potentially the next few sectors that you would look at from a disruption perspective, and what kind of disruption do you anticipate there and the role that you would play?
One of the areas in India here is in what we call bioconvergence, which is the intersection of high tech and deep tech in solving problems associated with med tech. So these are diagnostics or other applications. And the reason I'm excited about in India is when you look at what most other companies are doing outside of India today, they're trying to solve a problem of convenience. How do you make medical technology more convenient for people who already have access to medical technology? And in India, many of the companies we're seeing here are trying to solve the problem of access, which is how do you create access to medical services for people who do not have medical services? Because that's a big problem in India. It turns out that's the biggest problem in the world associated with this. And so that's an area that I am personally very excited about in India.
Arun?
Among others.
Among others. That's your top bet. Arun,
My own feeling is that we are going to be surprised by the new things that we come across. I think it's very difficult to predict what a new technology, especially AI at its current state, is going to throw up in front of us. So I'm really waiting to be surprised.
we're now in an era of high interest rates. It doesn't look like we're going to revert back to cheap money at least in the foreseeable future. We're going through geopolitical flashpoints, geopolitical tensions, which do weigh on business and commercial decisions as well. So it's a macroeconomic challenge that we're faced with, but also a geo-economic problem that companies and countries are faced with. From a startup founder's perspective, how are you looking at this situation as an investor? How do you look at this situation, and what is it going to mean for future capital and investments?
Well, I think you're exactly right. I think at least for the near future, the phase of easy money, the phase of inflated valuations, all of that is, I think, on a pause, if not significantly reversed. And it's a good thing. Sort of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Right now, people are, you want to see how much your cash can be extended to pay your employees and, get to profitability. It's no longer cool to say you're a unicorn, but you're not profitable. And I think that's, you have to pause and, let that sink in. Because being profitable is virtuous. Being a unicorn is pretty fluffy. So I would rather do the first thing than the latter. So if you focus on that, whether the cost of capital is continues to be prohibitively high or not, it's bothersome, but it's not life-threatening for a startup because you can continue to become more capital efficient. So that's point number one. Point number two, I think it's people are right now, unfortunately, in a very difficult place, whether it is, looking at what's going on in the Middle East, in Israel, and, there's a fundamental re-questioning of the information that we all consume. Mm-hmm. So there is there's a need for systems and technologies that really remove the wheat from the chaff in terms of what's real information and what's fake. And that blurring is causing a lot of problems. And that affects investors too. Because one of the things that we find is that you go into a startup and they claim that the market is very big. They claim that the technology is very good. They claim that they've made lots of progress, only to find later a lot of it is not true. And you're well aware of what's going on in India with some of the very famous funds that have become victims to that. So in a way, these are fundamental issues that startups have to really address. Focus on being capital efficient. Focus on not spending monies that you don't have. Using equity to acquire customers, a lot of people do it, is not the model that we like. We would rather use equity capital to solve fundamental technology problems. If you solve fundamental technology problems judiciously, business will come and you will be sustainable. And that's a much better approach than doing anything else.
So as a value-add investor, Arun, I'm going to give you the final say before I toss it across for any questions that we may have here from participants. As a value-add investor, what would the advice be to Indian entrepreneurs who are looking at the global opportunity and to companies operating outside of India looking at the India opportunity?
So I would say for Indian entrepreneurs, we certainly are looking for folks who want to solve an important problem, which means it has a large global market, and that they have a defensible approach to doing it. And today, in fact, at one of the earlier sessions, Ankit, IdeaForge, made a point, is I want to build something that's world's best. I'm not just looking to build something for India's best. So I think that's a really important point. I think I would also say that we need teams that can execute. And one thing that's really important for entrepreneurs is to have a very realistic sense of what they can achieve and then execute appropriately. Usually the problems start when execution fails and they don't understand why execution doesn't occur. So the answer to the question is people who can execute, who are looking to solve important problems with defensible approaches.
Thank you very much, Nick, Sri, and Arun for joining us here to talk about the road ahead as far as the collaboration between India and the Valley is concerned on deep tech transformation.